Hello, I'm Dr Sarah Jarvis, and today I've teamed up with Sealy UK to talk about sleep and how the amount of sleep you have or haven't had recently could be affecting your health and your quality of life. I'm going to be answering some of the commonest questions people have and some of the big questions on what to do about sleep problems and give you my top tips on how you can ensure a really good night's sleep. So let's go straight on to the first question. So our first question comes from Emma, and I think we all know how she feels. She's so exhausted in the evenings that she falls asleep on the sofa while she's watching television, but then gets to bed and promptly wide awake and awake for hours. She wants to know what she can do about it. Well, the important thing here is what we call sleep hygiene, Emma. So you need to think about bed as a place that you are going to go to get to sleep, and it needs to gradually roll down towards that. So for instance, if you're watching an action movie at night, you're not likely to be very sleepy. When you do get to bed, you want to make sure that your bedroom is somewhere that's really conducive to sleep. So you need to make sure that it's dark, that it's as quiet as possible, there are no flashing blue lights from electronic equipment, and that the temperatures are about right, about 16 to 18 degrees. Then think about your mattress. We spend a third of our lives asleep, and yet while we change our sofas every couple of years, we'll keep our mattresses for 20, so make sure that's comfortable. Same thing with your pillows. Everybody likes a different kind of pillow, but if we keep them too long, they all become one thing, and that's lumpy. It's the last thing you want. Then think about the worries you've got. If you're suddenly waking up when you get to sleep, it may well be that in previous nights you had a bad night's sleep, so the moment you do get into bed, you immediately think, I wonder if I'm going to have a problem sleeping tonight. What does that do? That raises your adrenaline levels. And what does adrenaline do? It keeps you awake. So have a routine that gets you towards sleep. Write down the stresses and strains of the day. Literally write them down on a piece of paper and then physically put them to bed. Then, if you do suddenly start worrying about things in the night, you can say, no, I'm very sorry, stress. I've put you to bed. Go back. It's your bedtime now. We'll talk again in the morning. Do make sure, for instance, that you're not drinking caffeine late at night. And unfortunately, you may find that your problem is linked to alcohol because it may help you get to sleep, but unfortunately it disrupts the quality of your sleep. And you may find that if you drank enough to put you to sleep on the sofa, by the time you get to bed, you're now at the stage where it's disrupting your sleep pattern. Good luck. So Joanne doesn't have any problem getting to sleep. It's the mornings that are the problem. She wakes up absolutely boing, wide awake between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's less than ideal. So the first thing to ask yourself, I suppose, Joanne, is are you a lark rather than an owl? We know that people have very different body clocks. And in fact, if you are waking up between 4 and 5, even if you could shift that maybe to between 5 and 6, and that's fine by you and you're performing well during the day, that's not necessarily a problem. The second thing is, are you going to sleep too early? So people assume that they're going to need 8 hours sleep or even 9 hours sleep because that's what we're told. In fact, the Sleep Council says it's hugely variable. It's probably as much to do with the quality of the sleep you get as to do with the quantity. So they say between 18 and 65 is a very rough rule of thumb, 7 to 9 hours, and over the age of 65, probably 7 to 8 hours. So if you're going to bed at 10 o'clock at night, but you actually only need 6.5, 7 hours sleep, you are going to be waking up every morning. And if you're waking up early, you might be tempted to go to bed earlier so that you can catch up on some of that sleep you lost. So get into the habit maybe of going to bed at 11 o'clock perhaps, so that if you're having 6 or 7 hours sleep, you'll be waking up between 5 and 6 a.m. 7 hours sleep would probably be a reasonable thing to aim for. Then think about alcohol. A lot of people will use alcohol to help them get to sleep, but unfortunately it interferes with the quality of your sleep, and it's also a diuretic. It makes you wee more, so you'll wake up early needing to wee, and then you won't be able to get to sleep. Finally, what about medical problems? There are two in particular which can be linked with early morning awakening. The first is depression, or mixed depression and anxiety. It can stop you getting to sleep, it can interfere with the quality of your sleep, and classically, it can cause early morning awakening. And the second is asthma. If your asthma isn't ideally controlled, the time you're more likely than any other to have symptoms is early in the morning, because that tends to be when your body's natural levels of cortisol, that's a natural internal hormone dip. So if your asthma isn't well controlled, that's the time that you're more likely to wake up. Don't be tempted to sleep in at the weekends or have a lie-in to make up for the fact that you're waking up too early either. You need to get into a routine, and you need to train your body to be sleeping between, say, 11 p.m. and 6 to 7 a.m. If you do that all week and you're waking up at 4 or 5 and then sleep until 10 at the weekend because you can, you've undone all that good work. Tom wants some advice. He may think he's a closet Mediterranean. He likes the idea of a good afternoon nap, and he wants to know if that's good or bad for sleep. Tom, I'm a doctor. You won't be surprised to hear that I'm going to sit on the fence on this one and say, it depends. So, if you don't have any problems sleeping at night, then in fact an afternoon nap early in the afternoon, not too late so it can interfere with your sleep that night, can be quite restorative. It can reduce your stress levels, it can help you relax, it can actually make you feel more alert when you get up, and you can function better. But there's a couple of caveats. The first is that you don't want to be sleeping too late or too long with your nap. So the longer you sleep for, more than say 10 to 20 minutes, the more likely you are to get down into those lower levels, those progressively deeper levels of sleep. Our sleep naturally goes in cycles of about an hour and a half, each one deeper than the previous one. So we have 3 layers of what we call non-REM, non-rapid eye movement sleep, and each one is deeper than the first. If you get down to a really deep level of sleep, yes, it's restful, but if you wake up from it, you can feel really quite groggy. The second thing is, if you are having problems sleeping, you really should try and avoid an afternoon nap, because that will disrupt your natural waking and sleeping patterns. So you may be tempted, if you've slept poorly the night before, to have an afternoon nap, but that makes it much more likely that you're not going to be sleepy when you need to go to bed the next night. So sadly, the more you need it, the less you should have it. Chris is asking probably the single most common question I get asked as a doctor about sleep. How much sleep should he be getting a night? He feels that because he's not getting 8 hours during the night, he ought at the weekends to catch up by getting more, but now he's worried it's bad for him. Well, Chris, the answer is there is no absolute answer. There's a huge variability between how much sleep people need. The Sleep Council says, as a very rough rule of thumb, 7 to 9 hours between the ages of 18 and 65, and 7 to 8 hours over the age of 65. But your body is naturally going through cycles of sleep, each one progressively deeper than the first. You go through 3 what are called non-REM, non-rapid eye movement phases. The whole cycle of 4 phases lasts about an hour and a half. The first phase, non-REM, is very light. You can be easily woken from it. The second's a bit deeper, the third's a bit deeper still, and then you get onto REM, rapid eye movement sleep, and that's where you tend to do your dreaming. You'll often have deeper sleep later in the night and more REM sleep later in the night. So if you're going to dream, you'll often find you're doing it in the early hours. The problem is that if you're getting into the second stage and then being woken up, whether it's because of noise, whether it's because you've got obstructed sleep apnea, whether it's because you're depressed, or whether it's just because you're anxious and a bit stressed, the less restful that sleep is going to be. So it's more to do with the quality of sleep and trying to make sure that you get those full cycles rather than the amount. Even if you're not getting 8 hours sleep a night during the week, if you feel fine and you're functioning fine, there isn't any need for you to sleep in at weekends. If you're not having a problem with sleep, then sleeping in at weekends is probably fine. But if you are suffering from insomnia, then the worst thing you can do is to try and make up for it at the weekend, because in fact what you're doing there is disrupting your body's pattern. So if this is an academic question and you just want to know and have no problems with your sleep, by all means, have your lie-in. Anna thinks she's sleeping okay, but no matter how much sleep she gets or how well she thinks she slept, she's waking up feeling tired. This can be a bit of a challenging one. I have to ask myself, the first thought that comes to my mind is whether or not you've got a condition called obstructive sleep apnea, and you may not know about it. It's more common if you're overweight, but doesn't always affect people if they're overweight, and indeed lots of normal weight people can get it. It's more common if you drink alcohol at night. What's happening is that your airways are becoming floppy when you're asleep, and that means they close down. That actually stops you from breathing, and that can go on for a few seconds to nearly a minute. Then suddenly you gasp awake. You won't necessarily know you've woken up, but you start breathing again. People with OSA, as it's called, are almost always snorers, so your other half can usually tell you, but they may also be able to tell you whether or not you're stopping breathing for periods at night. If you are, it's probably worth seeing your doctor, especially if it's having an impact on your function during the day, because there are remedies. The classic remedy is to wear a mask which applies continuous pressure called the CPAP, continuous positive airways pressure, to keep the airways open. It's not pretty, but it can really make a difference. Otherwise, if you're feeling tired, could you be depressed? Could you be stressed? Could you be anxious? All of those things can interfere with the quality of your sleep. Or could your sleep environment be less than ideal? If your mattress isn't comfortable, if you're being disturbed by light or by noise, you may have those sleep cycles disrupted. So although you don't actually wake and you don't realise you're waking up, the sleep you're getting is less restful. Andrew wants me to answer a question, or rather mediate in a dispute between him and his partner. He wants to know if it's healthier to sleep naked or in pyjamas. Now, the good news for me is that I don't know who's on which side, so I can give you an answer, and the answer is almost certainly naked. What happens as we get towards sleep is our body temperature naturally cools down, and that starts to initiate the sleep mechanism. If your body temperature can't cool down because you're in pyjamas or in something very warm, then it's much harder to do that. During the night, your temperature naturally gets lower. And again, if you're too hot, and that's before we've even got on to women and the menopause, then you're more likely to have disrupted sleep, to wake up feeling too hot. Then, of course, there's the hygiene aspect of things. Getting too warm and sweaty increases the likelihood of women getting thrush. So if you're wearing pyjamas or wearing underpants underneath your nightie, you're more prone to thrush, especially at night, because we're under warm covers. And there is some evidence, don't know where you are in your family planning, Andrew, but there is some evidence that men who sleep in pyjamas are more likely to have poorer sperm quality than men who let it all hang out. So on balance, naked, for medical reasons, yes. Oliver finds that when he's just about to fall asleep, he suddenly gets a sensation that he's falling and he jerks awake. He wants to know what that is. Well, you'll be delighted to hear that it has a name, and that name is the glorious hypnagogic jerks. The slightly less interesting name as an alternative is hypnic jerks. And basically they're just muscle spasms. Your body generally has an uncontrolled spasm of muscle contractions just in the transition between wake and sleep. It is absolutely nothing to worry about in the vast majority of cases. Some things can make it worse, so excess caffeine, excess alcohol, stress, depression, anxiety, sleep deprivation, and possibly very, very tough exercise, particularly just before you go to bed. All of those can make it more marked. Now, we're not quite sure why they happen. It could simply be that your neurons are sort of misfiring in the natural transition between wake and sleep. It could be an evolutionary thing. We are primates. We came from the trees. It may be that it was in our interest from the point of view of survival to wake up suddenly if we started to fall out of a tree. But regardless of what it is, you should be able to avoid it by avoiding those risk factors I mentioned. And no, it won't do you any harm at all. Ella recently stopped smoking. Hurrah! Congratulations, Ella. That's great news. Please do not go back to it. But she's found that she's getting really vivid nightmares about starting smoking again. She wants to know what she can do. Well, sleep is divided into different sections. Dreaming occurs during REM sleep, that's rapid eye movement sleep, and that's also, of course, where nightmares occur. Sleep tends to get progressively deeper, and during the end of the night, you're more likely to spend long periods in REM sleep. So you'll often, if you're going to have nightmares or dreams, get them towards the end of the night. The first thing to do is to think about why you were getting these. You might want to do a little bit of sort of self-CBT. Are you worried that your resolve may fail? Just talking to friends, or certainly getting some support from a smoking cessation advisor, could really make a difference with that. Or could it be that you're taking medication? Some medication can cause nightmares or vivid dreams. It's probably worth checking with your GP about whether you're taking those. You don't say anything in your question about them, but for instance, particularly some antidepressants, some sleeping tablets and so on can cause vivid nightmares, but they don't need to be sleeping tablets. Eating late at night, certainly certain foods can be triggers, and people say they cause them to have very vivid dreams. And drinking alcohol, if your sleep is disrupted, can cause you to have nightmares. So have a think about all of those. If there is an underlying issue like taking medication, then clearly talking to your GP about that may be able to solve the underlying problem. But otherwise, maybe a bit of counselling, possibly even some hypnotherapy to improve your confidence that you are not an ex-smoker, you are a non-smoker. Might make the difference. Well, that's all we've got time for today. And hopefully I've answered some of your pressing questions about sleep, or more importantly, lack of it. If you do want more information, do head to the Seeley Healthy Sleep Hub, where there's lots more information and my tips on how you can sleep more healthily and more happily.